we'd had years where we were doing 150, 175 shows, 200 shows even, and this is globally, not in your town, but we were running all over the world, and this was constant. We called it the Million Gig March.
Oftentimes I think of Jim being some sort of drumming Jules Verne, because when you think of Jules Verne books like The Journey to the Center of the Earth or The Journey to the Moon or something like that, he
Yeah.
wrote about things
That's it.
that were impossible at that time, but then, I mean, later it was done. It is actually this book with a vinyl, and it still has the exercises in here.
There's a saying, don't let school get in the way of your education. And that is
I like that.
that is so true. That is so true. Because you want to take the things that you learn and you want to use those things the way you use them, not the way that they are in a book.
I wanted to say that it's really great to have you all here during this Jim Chapin's Independence Week, when we celebrate the legacy and his huge impact on the drumming community and the drumming scene that he had throughout all these years. Let me officially introduce you to our host for tonight or for the day, depending on your location, Mr. Claus Hessler, who was Jim's master student for years, and our special guest, Mr. David Garibaldi, who doesn't need much introduction, I'm sure. So, gentlemen, I'm personally very excited to have you here, and we're all really excited for this upcoming conversation. We are truly honored to have you here, and I'm sure that we'll hear some interesting stories about Jim, about drumming, about music. We'll see where those stories will take us. I guess we're ready. So, Klaus, if you don't mind, please take it from here.
Absolutely, I will. I mean, first of all, as it has been communicated, we're celebrating the legacy and the heritage of Jim Chapin, and not just his mastery of Moeller Technique, but also his concepts in independence, and his books, and his visionary, educational concepts. And I'm really happy that you, David, are here with me, because you knew Jim, and you were a very close friend to Dom, who was possibly one of the closest people to Jim. So I can not imagine anyone better than you being here and giving also your perspective towards Jim's achievements and his input on the evolution of modern drum set playing. In the first place, it should be mentioned, if we speak about Jim, obviously it's also to some degree about Jim's studies with Sanford Moeller. So that's going to be a certain topic along the way. But I would say a lot of things started with this book, and you would think, why is this book white and not blue? I would think yours would be blue, David, isn't it?
It is. I have one. Gee, I got it like, I don't know. How old was I? 19, 20 years old when I got it. So I've had it for a very, very long time. And I think, modern independence, the way that we think about it has a lot to do with Jim and the way that he introduced that to everyone.
Very much so. And I think there was no book around on independence before Jim's visionary book. And also
I don't remember one. I think that was the one I remember. I don't remember any others. And then, of course, after that, people started doing more of it. You could learn those things, but, in the beginning, no.
Really? And so I mean, we talked a little bit about your background when you were over here at my studio, but what would you say were your sources when you studied drums. I mean, it was obviously the Chapin stuff, but what else still?
Well, seeing as how I'm a little bit older these days, I'm not going to say exactly how old, but when I began, kind of like learning how to study and those kind of things, learning was much more traditional. So everyone sort of came up in the orchestral, band
Yeah,
world, and the jazz tradition. There was, stick control, of course. This is to me like biblical. I still use it. Um,
mm-hmm.
Jim's books, modern reading text. The Louis Bellson stuff, which came later. But then what it was the Goldenberg method for snare
Yeah,
drum, these kind of things, Podemsky, all the Wilcox and stuff. I mean, these were things that were around you know, when I
yeah,
was getting into things because education really wasn't very sophisticated drum education as like how it's become.
yeah.
So,
True.
the introduction to of rock and roll and all of those other things, really changed
Mm.
the way that people wanted to learn and that kind of stuff, because
True.
prior to
True.
that, if you wanted to learn something, you had to study the recordings and that kind of thing. And if you were fortunate enough to see someone play, then of course, you'd be able to pick up some things. But it was all
Yeah.
about using your imagination because really the creative sources were kind of to learn from were sort of minimal. So you had to really use your imagination about how to put things together for yourself.
True, true, and oftentimes I think of Jim being some sort of drumming Jules Verne, because when you think of Jules Verne books like The Journey to the Center of the Earth or The Journey to the
Yeah,
Moon or something like that, he
yeah,
wrote about
yeah. That's
things
it.
that were impossible at that time, but then, I mean, later it was done. Humans are traveling to the moon. We are traveling, well, not to the center of the earth, but we do quite a lot of things that Jules Verne sort of predicted. And just like he was this visionary writer, Jim was this visionary kind of drummer and educator. And there's actually a little background story about this book being white, and uh, it still has that dedication that says to Sam, SAM, and it still has my old address in there, which is not valid anymore. So never mind. But SAM is no one else than Sanford Augustus Moeller, which in the later editions of the book is really printed out the way it is. And in the first self-published copies that Jim put out and Jim printed, it was only S.A.M. because Sanford Moeller made him play certain ostinatos with one hand and play something against it with the other hand. And Jim just thought, what if I make it ding, jinka ding, jinka ding, and then play something against it? So that was more or less the starting point for that journey towards coordinated independence, how it was then later called. And the aspect about this book being white is simply just that the printer where Jim used to go was running out of blueprint. So so Jim said, I need new books printed. I need new books. And the printer goes, well, but I'm running low on blueprint, so you may have to wait for another couple of weeks before I get that blue ink in my factory here. So but I could print it the other way around. I could make anything white, which used to be blue, and the other way around. For that, I still have enough blue ink. And Jim was saying, yeah, let's go. Let's do it like that. And this is why, at a certain point in time, those books were, for a short period of time, they appeared to be white. So that's kind of a little fun story on the side. And I also brought another gem that you maybe know of, David, which is this. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, so it is actually it it is actually this book with a vinyl, and it still has the exercises in here. So it's the full book um, and it also has some elements of text which are not covered in the book. And you know, someone gave it to me at a masterclass. It was a, it was it was a progress. It was a present that once was given to me from someone who attended a
Nice
workshop.
gift.
It is really totally, yeah. And
That's cool.
and and as you were just saying, um, uh, it. I mean, it's a lot of just listening to other drummers, and there's an interesting paragraph here. Uh, as you were saying, if you were possibly lucky enough to listen to all of these great legendary drummers, he writes, Jim feels that he's also fortunate in that New York time of the late 30s, and he recalls one brief period where he heard Gene Krupa and Lionel Hampton with Goodman, Dave Tuff with Dorsey and Goodman, Ray Baduch with Bob Crosby. Wait a second. Ray Baduch with Bob Crosby, who's I think the father of Bing Crosby, by the way. Cozy Cole with Stuff Smith, Jimmy Crawford with Lunsford, Sonny Greer with Duke, Joe Jones with Count Basie, Chick Webb with his own band, Sid Catlett with Louis Armstrong, O'Neill Spencer with John Kirby, Slick Jones with Fats Waller, Arthur Herbert with Pete Brown, Buddy Rich with Joe Marsala, Bunny Berrigan and Artie Shaw, Cliff Leemans with Shaw, and Charlie Barnett. I mean, he's citing all these legends that he heard in a very short period of time in the 30s in New York City and studied their style.
Wow.
So, I mean, that is just priceless. I mean, we wish we would have been in the room, right? So,
Wow.
just completely incredible.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, I have
It's
been looking
amazing
at
that all those guys were around at that time. I mean, they're all in the same place playing with all those bands. I mean, that's kind of San Francisco-ish, early 70s kind of
right.
thing, where there was so much music going on and you could hear all these great drummers, doing all this great music going on that you'd never heard before. It was
Yeah.
the sort of that similar kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what would you say? What if you had to mention some of these '70s drummers that were around then in the Bay Area?
Well, if you've seen the Stick People podcast, all those
Uh-huh.
guys, Lenny White was here from New York.
Wow.
He came
Uh-huh.
and was actually really here for a while, got really involved in all the music scene here. I first heard him with the Chick Corea Trio with Stanley Clark. And,
Mhm.
he's a young dude. And so him, Michael Shreve with
Mhm, mhm.
Santana, Mike Clark. Mike Clark was
Yeah.
one of the very first guys I met after I got out of the military and came back to the Bay Area to start working and getting back into music. And that was before we had our gigs, before I got the gig with Tower, before Mike had his gig with, with Herbie,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Gregorico. Gregorico was Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Wow.
was legendary around here. Then there was another guy, Gaylord Birch. Gaylord passed away. He was like legendary drummer here. Harvey
Uh-huh.
Hughes. I mean, there was all kind of guys. It was really something. And it was a great. Eddie Marshall was another guy. Played with the
Uh-huh.
Fourth Way. Um, there was tons of them. That's just every neighborhood had a cool drummer. There were cool bands. It was stunningly
Wow.
great.
Yeah. Incredible. Did you run into Jim Chapin one or the other time, or can you remember of some encounters that you had with Jim?
Well, I would see him all the time, at NAMM shows and that kind of thing, and we would talk. And, I was studying with Murray Spivak in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
and I don't know that Jim was too fond of him, based on our conversations, but
Yes.
that's who I was
Yeah.
studying with. And, there was LA had a different sort of a scene, you know, there
Mm-hmm.
with guys who were studying and the teachers that were available. And,
Yeah.
you know, Freddie Gruber was there, Murray, Richard Wilson, Joe Percaro had
Mm-hmm.
students, you know, so it was a whole different sort of a thing than, you know, what Jim was doing. So there was Moeller was involved in, you know, those techniques were involved in what we were learning, but it wasn't anything like Jim was doing. Jim was like a visionary, unique sort of a guy, you know. I really would have liked to study with him sometime. I just never had that opportunity. You're very
Mm-hmm.
fortunate.
Well, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, oftentimes it was really also challenging to host Jim, since I mean, I enjoyed the time we had together a lot, I should say, but being around Jim was thinking, living, eating drums 24/7 all the way through, and that can be, I mean, quite demanding, if to say the least. But it was good
You
fun,
know,
and
Klaus, one time I was that I'm thinking of it. I was in Europe. I was doing the this drum festival that they used to have in Koblenz,
yeah, hmm,
and so I was on a train. Where was I? What train? I was coming from somewhere else in Europe. I was on the train, and Jim was on there,
come on,
and he had been going around Europe on
hmm,
the train. I don't think anybody was bringing him around. I mean, he was there. He kind of like was this, you know, kind of drum teacher that was, you know, around Europe. I'd see him.
absolutely, and I mean, most of the time I would organize the work for him, and he would travel by train. Oftentimes he was traveling by bus, and you know what? He even preferred traveling by bus because that was cheaper. Uh, so, although I mean, Jim was he was hardcore. He would travel from my place to the UK by bus, which is, I mean, a nightmare on the bus, really. But he said, "Oh, it's fine. I'm going to do it." He was that sort of a guy.
Yeah.
Totally unbelievable. Yeah. And I mean, I still brought three other things that you maybe also have seen or heard of, which which is only
Oh,
three of Jim's play-alongs. So what a lot of people also don't know, Jim, I guess, was the first drummer ever who produced drum play-alongs. Now, check this out.
I have never seen those.
You never seen
Never
those?
seen those.
So that was
No,
Wipeout
sir.
was a later one, and uh, and I mean, Sit In, I think, was the first, and Sit
Wow.
In even has one track on there which is called Love and Laughter, which is from a musical that Jim composed, but it has actually never made it to the stage for different reasons. But Love and Laughter was one of the songs out of the musical that he composed. And he always had great musicians, like it had Clark Terry, Sonny Truitt, George Duvivier on bass. So it was always a great lineup. So another thing where you'd say, okay, he was really visionary about drumming education, and he put those play-alongs out somewhere in the 60s, 70s. I don't know. I should go
I've
back
never
and
seen those.
find. Yeah, and they're pretty good actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Quite.
would imagine. I've never seen those. I didn't even know they existed. Well, that's great. You know.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing, and of course, there's this book here, which is no longer in print, and it's really an open end. I mean, if you're talking about studying independence, this is unfinishable. It's it's really something else,
I have
and
it somewhere in my collection of
yeah,
books. I have that somewhere here.
it's quite amazing. Did you ever work out of it or do something with it?
I think I might have looked at it, but I never really got into it because I was into, got into Tower and then,
Mhm.
Tower Power, and then I was knowing books and I was doing all those kind of things, So, those were just things that now that I have, maybe at some point I'll get back into them, but over time, no, I just had my own things that I was working on.
Yeah, of course. And would you say there was a certain influence that, I mean, that on your drumming based out of the concept of independence that that sort of made you the drummer you are?
Well, if you think about, all of this is whatever you can dream up for yourself, just like Jim did, just like
Mm.
we're all learning how to do what we've done, to build
Yeah, yeah,
our playing is you think of things, you try things, you add things, you subtract things, you create
yeah,
with what you learn. I mean, that's really all about it. What this is all about, really.
yeah. Boy, yeah, but if you think of it like that from this sort of perspective, it's actually hard to imagine that. I mean, even if you don't know who Jim is and what he did to the drumming community, it's actually impossible to not be influenced by him because the whole idea about independence, finally, it all leads back to his concepts because his book was the first one that ever conceptualized the idea of coordinated independence and
Yeah, and I don't
which
know,
yeah,
I don't know that if he, there were probably things that he invented, but he also probably was hearing a lot of things that other drummers were doing, and he was the first one to put it in writing so that people could understand it. Just like the stuff that I've done in my books.
mhm,
A lot of the initial things I didn't invent them. I just wrote it down so I could communicate it to
mhm,
people,
mhm.
so that
Yeah,
I could understand it. I would write it down, and then it ended up being in my books, and I developed a whole bunch of other things, off of all of that.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
you think of all the great drummers that you mentioned, all the people to listen to. I mean, they must have been doing some of the things that he was writing about. All those drummers, those are all guys that are we still study.
true, true, yeah,
So I'm
it's
sure that, his the way that he put it together, the way that he put it together was totally unique. He actually devised a system to explain all of that, and it was brilliant the way that
yeah.
it made that available on a wider, a larger scale. Everyone could learn about it then. You know.
Yeah, true, true. And I mean, even to learn, or especially to learn about all the achievements that he introduced first, I think, like the first book on independence, the first play-alongs, and and like with this one here, that's also the first time ever where a number system had been used to compose rhythm on a more or less computed way, like groups of fives and sevens and threes and nines, which in the end made a certain number. And he would create his reading texts out of a number system that he found with a modern composer by the name of Schillinger. So the Schillinger system is
Yeah,
introduced
I've heard of that.
in this book, and I mean today when we think of I don't know any sort of odd meter concepts, we break it down to smaller groups, to number systems, and we say, okay, here's a three, here's a seven, here's a five, here's whatsoever. But Jim was actually the first person ever who put this into book form and who used it for educational purpose. I don't think there was a book before that introducing this. So it's just amazing to
Wow.
see how many things
Yeah.
he he kind of, I mean, not really invented, but he used it for a drumming purpose and
Yeah.
to communicate his drumming ideas. So that's just completely overwhelming.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, when you listen to guys who you would consider the first, you never heard of people before that. There's first guys doing stuff.
Mm,
To me, that's always totally stunning. In the there's Clyde Stubblefield with James Brown. If you listen
mm,
to that track called "I Got the Feeling," this was
mm,
1968, And you could put it on today and not know who it is and think, oh my God, who is this? It sounds that modern. And
Yeah.
this was 1968, and these guys were, inventing vocabulary that we use today. All of us are using that. It's
Yeah.
in that world. And so
Yeah.
it's incredible these people like that, that are kind of, just they think differently. They
Yeah.
just have a different way that they think about things, and it's really pretty incredible. But I think people like that who are themselves, uniquely themselves, those are the people that we study. We don't study the ones that are the clones like everybody else. We study the ones that are individuals, and then those individuals, their lessons resonate through history.
They
And
do.
so you
They
look
do.
at, like, Jim, then you think of, Tony Williams, Elvin, Max Roach, guys like this, John Bonham, people like this. All these guys, we study them still. They're
Yeah.
fresh today because they were unique in the way that they visualized their art.
Yeah. That's true.
I
Yeah.
mean, this is
And
art no more, this is art no more, no less, right? I mean, this is what we do. It's art. And so I think you want to take the things that you learn and then you want to turn that into some sort of expression of yourself, whatever that is. So
sure.
you learn all these great things that Jim taught, but you're not going to take a page of Jim's exercises to your gig. You're not going to do that. You're going to
Obviously not.
learn
No.
concept. You learn concept, and then what do you do with that? You create things with the concept that you learn. The shell concept of independence, ostinato, one hand, or however you want to use that. And then you build ideas and you make music with it. You learn how to be musical with
Yeah.
those concepts.
True. And you know what? It reminds me of a sentence that Jim often said when people were asking about, yes, Jim, but now I'm practicing all of that, but how do I get to the next stage? How do I do all that? How do I apply all of this? And Jim would say, give me 20 minutes daily in front of the mirror, and when you go on stage, forget you know me. So
Yeah,
I
there
totally
you go. Good
admired that
advice.
sentence. When you go on stage, forget you know me. And I mean
Yes, good advice.
it takes some courage to do that, but it really keeps you from just playing stupid exercise. It reminds you of, yes, you take all of that information in, but you try to use it musically, and you try to build
Yes.
your own act out of this. Just like Jim would say that in the early days of drum set evolution, he was saying you could recognize most drummers by the way their instrument was looking like. You could see this must be Sid Catlett. You could see this is Baby Dodds. You would see this is Paul Barberin. He was the biggest fan of Paul Barberin. And you would see this is
Yeah.
Sudie Singleton, and you would see this is Buddy because it's set up very much like the way Gene used to set up, because Buddy Rich was the biggest Gene Krupa fan. So all of that, I mean, connects to understanding that the single most important muscle in drumming is located between your ears. That's usually how I like
Oh,
to
without
put it.
question.
Yeah,
Without question. Drumming is way more than paradiddles.
yeah,
It's like how you think. And because this is the control center, this tells your limbs what to do. And if you don't have this organized, then your limbs are not going to,
yeah.
do what they're supposed to do. And so if you're having struggles with coordination and different things, maybe it's
Mm,
the instructions that you're giving yourself. Maybe look at that.
yeah,
If your hand doesn't do what it's supposed to do, what are you telling it to do? And a couple of
absolutely.
things is that there's a saying, don't let school get in the way of your education. And that is
I like that.
so that is so true. That is so true. Because you want to take the things that you learn and you want to use those things the way you use them, not the way that they are in a book. So as we continue to develop our playing, we get further and further away from our influences, and we become more of ourselves
Yeah.
and less derivative.
True.
You know, the thing that I admired about all the drummers that I loved when I was coming up was that they all had a personality in their playing. They didn't sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
And I could listen to them. I could tell who it was, listen to the recording. I knew who it was. I could hear their personality in their playing. And I thought, this is so cool. And it's, you know, for me, I wanted that more than I wanted the things that they were playing. I wanted to have an identity. I wanted to have, you know, a personality in my playing like these guys did. So that's what I tried to do, is have a voice. I wanted to have a voice.
Yeah.
You know, when you go to all I love going to art museums, and I've been to Europe so many times over the years, you know, and I always like going to art museums, whether it's in France or Italy or
Yeah.
wherever. And you sit and you look at these beautiful, beautiful paintings that were done hundreds of years ago, and they still speak to people. You sit there and you just look at it, and you're stunned at the beauty of it, the detail of it. And this came from somebody's brain, their conception of this art piece, and it's still there, impressing people, inspiring people, teaching people. It's stunning.
Yeah, it is. It is true. And it's all about the uniqueness of, I mean, a personal way of communicating your form of art that you communicate through this beautiful instrument here, and trying to make it yours,
That's
and
correct.
trying to develop what your thing is, no matter who your teachers were. You just take in what your teacher or your teachers told
That's
you,
correct.
and you understand the concepts, but you make your thing out of it, which takes some courage, yes, because it implies to be different than a lot of other people, which takes courage. But
Okay, well, let me ask you about this. Let me ask you about this. Let me ask you this. When you learned handwriting in school, you were taught block lettering, you were taught cursive lettering, you were taught all these things and how to write. You were taught that. And for you to start using that in your life, did that take courage? I don't think so. I think what it took was you just doing it. You just using and
True.
using it and understanding what it was as a way to express yourself. And then you never thought any more about it because your handwriting was your own. It became yours. So it's the same thing with music. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
You learn, and your handwriting, your musical signature is you. You can't be anyone else. You can learn, but at some point, it's going to go the way that you always go,
Yeah.
into your way of doing it, your way of using your vocabulary, your way of expressing yourself.
Yeah, good
But
point.
for some reason with drumming, we're so concerned about it, and you know, it has to be certain ways. It has to be this. It has to be that. It doesn't have to be any of it. It's supposed to be the way that I want my art to be. That's how
Yeah.
it's supposed to be,
Yeah.
because this is art, no more, no less. If you have the good fortune to be able to progress in this, if you can make a living, you can feed your family doing this, God bless you. It is so, it's available. It's available to everyone, no matter how difficult, you know, the current economical situation is and all these other things. I meet people all over the world who have what they call for themselves success, or doing really well. They're happy people. They are very artistic. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it is. It is. And Jim always was, I think, one of the happiest persons that I ever met. You would never meet Jim being down or depressed or anything like that. He was always happy, and there was to him there was nothing better like traveling, talking to people, teaching people. He was so passionate about all of that, and it made his day. If he could talk drums all day long, that was what he wanted to do. And if he was invited for dinner in the
He
evening,
pretty
and
much did that.
yeah,
He pretty
yeah,
much did that. You go to the NAMM shows and he's sitting in a corner at
yeah,
this NAMM show in Los Angeles.
yeah,
I saw him so many times there, and he's sitting there with his practice pad, people all around him. He's just talking and he's doing all of his exercises and all these things while he's talking, and it was just for hours he'd be doing that.
yeah. Just incredible. Okay, so I mean, there's tons of stories, and I mean, we can go on with this for hours and hours, but maybe there's still one or two questions out there from the people watching this, and I understand there are quite some of these in the comments, which I'm not always able to follow while I'm having this conversation with you. But you, Simon, if you possibly just take it over, and maybe there are some questions out there which about stories, or I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah. So I've got one written down. So just let me read it to,
Yeah,
I guess,
yeah.
to both of you. Jim was always pushing the limits, working on open-handed drumming and double bass right up to the end of his life. So if he were alive today, what do you think he would be working on? And what was the main impact both of your drumming and lives that Jim gave you?
Wow, that's a deep one. You want to
So
go
maybe
first,
let's start
David?
with this one.
I think we talked about it earlier.
Uh,
Is that modern independence? The understanding of it comes from Jim. First documenting it and then creating a way to teach people, and his super creative systems of independence, and all the things we talked about. All of us
Yeah.
do that today because of him, really. And
Absolutely.
teaching us how to understand it. I mean, who else was doing that? I don't think anybody.
Yeah. And
Even though there were unique players around,
yeah,
even though there were unique players around, because you read the list, he wrote it down. He says, well, how can I teach this? He must have asked himself that. How can I learn more about this? Where is this going to go? And then he just kept going, and had obviously, his later book that had the number system and all that stuff in it.
yeah,
Man, who was doing that? Who even thought about that stuff at the time? And then Gary
no one.
Chafee came along and, popularized a lot of those kind of things, But, wow.
Yeah.
That's all I could say is wow.
I can remember Jim drawing sketches of a drum set that he would like to have, which included a left-footed bass drum pedal, so he could set up the bass drum like remotely and having enough space for a lot of toms. That was what he was dreaming of. So,
Yeah.
and he said, "Yeah, I
Okay.
kind of like my hands, but I hate my feet." that he would usually say, "I hate my feet."
That's good.
So whenever we were doing a master class or something anywhere, he was always requesting double pedal so he could do like a little dooga 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 and do his stuff on top of that. And of course, there's still the system or the whole concept of collapsed and expanded rolls, as he chose to call it,
Oh,
which
yeah, that's
should
another
have been Advanced Techniques Volume 3, but never was published. The pages are still here, and I wanted to publish it with Dom, but life got in the way, and it's only me left. So I have a couple of pages here still that say from Chapin to Dom to Klaus. So this is still
Get going. Do it. Yeah, get going.
another one.
Write it. Here's somebody posted this on the chat. Dom Famularo would say something like, "Jim was a lesson waiting to happen."
Yeah, and that was it is, and Dom also used to say, "Jim put the fun in dysfunctional."
Yeah, I can see that. That's amazing.
Okay, so Simon, back to you.
Well, there's a question, a brief one, to you, David. Do you use the NNS when recording with Tower? I personally don't know what the NNS is, so maybe also if you could just say a word about it. Okay, so maybe we can get the explanation for the shortcut. Nashville number system.
Christian, I don't think about drumming like that. You know, I really don't. I mean, when I was learning how to play, it was about learning beats and that kind of thing. And then as I started studying and I learned about permutation and how to use that, you know, permutation was an idea that the teacher gave me a long time ago, but it was in the concert realm with snare drum parts. And he would talk about permutating these parts and showed us how to do it. And so I took that and I just applied it to the drum set. And of course, you know, that took me all kind of places, that developing, you know, vocabulary and then learning how to play odd times in 4/4 and, you know, turning your grooves into triplets and all the 6/8 world and all that stuff. And then getting into Latin music and all these things, you know, but NNS, I don't know. I know what you're talking about, but it isn't that way for me. You know, I don't think of drumming as a number system, you know.
Yeah.
That's just me. There's numbers in it for sure, but I don't view it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, music is applied mathematics, but when you do it, you don't think of the numbers.
Yeah, I mean it's you know, Thomas Lang, what does he say? Drumming is binary. It's ones and zeros. You know, you're just making up stuff, you know. So if there is a number system, there's one, you know, ones and zeros. So, you know, that's an infinite way to look at what we do, because if you really get into trying to, you know, study rhythm and its application in your playing, it's endless.
Yeah.
Literally endless. It's, you know, because there's math. Math is an endless concept that just keeps going and going, combination, combination, combination. And if you learn those things and have those things become your ally in your creativity, then you can, and music, you're applying this in your music, man, it's going to be scary what you're going to be able to do.
Can I jump in and ask one more question from one of the participants? Do you consider the Moeller method was invented and applied strictly for a marching snare, really closer to you as a position, and more for louder volume, higher velocity than speed? And Jim Chapin was the person who applied to actually on a drum set, snare drum, which is not that close to you. So what we think of Moeller method is actually Jim's method.
Well, I mean, if we were to answer that properly, it would take us a long time. But I mean, at the end of the day, Moeller technique is just based out of observations that Moeller made on army drummers that had played field drums, rope tension field drums in the Civil War. And the way they played is based out of a strong European legacy of rudimental drumming, I should say. I mean, which includes the fist-like grip on the right hand stick. So yes, Jim applied it to drum set, but Moeller technique in itself came out of the rudimental world, and yes, a lot of elements of Moeller technique can be used very efficiently around the drums. So the drum set is a pretty cool playground to make use or to take advantage of certain tools of Moeller technique. But originally it is really something like a rudimental technical thing, which wasn't originally made for the drum set, really. I mean, to make it short. So
You know, Klaus, if I could say one thing here too, is that, you know, people get really hung up with the word technique and, you know, talk about the technique. It's the thing. Well, no. If you think about it, I looked at this one time. There's a definition that I found for technique that said technique is a method of procedure.
true.
Hello?
And Yeah.
If it's a method of procedure, not the method of procedure, a method, then that means how many methods of procedure are there? How many techniques are involved when you sit down to perform and play and do the things that you do? It's multifaceted. So
Very
the
much.
Moeller technique is a technique, a technique, remember, a technique. It's one of the ways that you do stuff. So when I was living in Los Angeles and I was looking for a teacher, and I was really concerned because all the teachers were saying, my stuff is better than everybody else's. They were all saying this. So you
Mm,
had the Gruberites, you had the Chapinites, you had the Murrayites, all these
mm,
different people that were in Los Angeles, studying these different things. So I went
mm,
to Joe Porcaro, who was a friend of mine, and we would sit and talk. And he was a very wise man, very high level, performer.
mm,
Was telling him about this. He says, "Well, why don't you just study with everyone and then make up your own?"
mm. It,
Hello, that's pretty simple.
yeah, yeah, and it's just a, I mean, it's a procedure, yes, and it's a fashion of, say, streamlining and optimizing your movements in order to achieve a certain musical vision that you have up here, and
Certainly helps it. It
yeah,
certainly helps it because there are people that I've heard that have no technique whatsoever, but when you close their eyes, their ideas absolutely are unbelievably cool and make the music sound good.
yeah,
But, so again, what do you want to sound like? What do you want to do? What do you see in yourself musically that you would like to explore? And what will help you get there? I think that's the thing.
yeah.
What is that? It could be anything. There's so many different techniques and things out there to help us to play better.
Yeah, very much. Good point, David.
That's awesome. I mean, if you would like to continue, if you have Klaus, maybe still something to say, that's awesome. Otherwise, I still have 3 questions. So, would you like?
Yeah, let's move on with a couple of these questions, and I mean, before we wrap it up,
Wrap,
and
yeah,
yeah,
cool. So let me just read those out loud. So the first one, what are some of your biggest takeaways as artists from Jim Chapin's philosophy of drumming and music?
oh, for me that's easy. Jim was never afraid of making mistakes. That is something I learned from Jim. Trying to not be afraid of mistakes. If you go out on stage, you go on stage and you play and you perform and you do your thing, but as soon as you begin to be afraid of mistakes, you're stepping in your own way. You're stumbling over your own feet. And Jim, I mean, I don't want to get myself into trouble now, but I have heard Jim perform at times, and it was absolutely fabulous. I thought, Jesus Christ, how did he just do that? And I heard him play other times where he said, Jim, I'm not sure if that was so cool. And then after the gig, he would say, Klaus, at times I think I'm the king, but other times I think I should be a used car salesman or a plumber. See, he really said that, and that was just so fabulous, and it always showed me he was just not afraid of making mistakes. He went out and he gave it to the people, and he was so passionate about what he did that he couldn't care less about whatever would come out. If it was a mistake, it's a mistake. Go with it. But chances are it would be amazing, and he always accepted that challenge.
Hey, one thing too is Sergio Bellotti here from Boston says, just to clarify, the Nashville number system refers to the chords, harmony, and how a drummer follows that to play a song. I didn't realize we were talking about the Nashville number system. So I don't use that because I don't live in Nashville, and I read music in a traditional way, but that is a whole other system which I do not understand that,
Mm.
was invented in Nashville. I mean, it's a whole incredible way that they write there are
Mm.
parts there, and there are charts and stuff. I don't know what that is, but
Mm.
it's pretty cool. I will say that.
Well, it's something that probably it's worth maybe arranging a meeting for and talk about it more. It's a new
Oh,
thing for me too.
that'd be a good
So
idea, I think.
yeah, for sure.
That'd be great.
David, would you like to add something to that first question, or should I just move on with another one?
I mean, you can move on to another one. I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about, Jim and his legacy, which was to me an illustration of how to be yourself, which is really the main thing we're talking about here is
Mm.
being yourself. That's one of the things that Jim taught us. He didn't say be yourself, maybe, but that's what he's taught us by example in the way that, the freshness of his material still and all these things. Be yourself. Who knows what, by you being yourself, what impact you would have on our community
Mm.
by doing that.
It's very well said. I mean, it's just being yourself and don't be afraid. And that could wrap
Yeah.
those two answers
Yeah.
pretty nicely. Uh,
You can't be anything but yourself. You can't
Yeah.
be anything but yourself. So why not just dive in and go all the way and be you?
Go for it.
Yeah. True.
True. Let me ask another one to David. So the question is very long. So stay focused. What's the next for you?
Oh, that.
Yeah, that's
Well,
it.
I'm not with Tower Power. Yeah, I'm not with Tower Power. My life with Tower Power is over. And a couple things. One thing I guess you could say I sort of aged out of the gig. I had some physical challenges in the last few years. That really impacted my ability to perform well and all of those things. And so it just got to be very stressful keeping my level of performance up to where I wanted it to be. I invented the chair for myself. So the bar there was set by me for me. And I wasn't able to get there consistently anymore after that accident that I had. So it became very, very challenging. I did pretty well. I had some really fabulous, runs with the band, during that period. But then it got to be where it just was wearing me out, the travel. Tower Power, we'd had years where we were doing 150, 175 shows, 200 shows even. And this is globally, not in your town, but we were running all over the world. And this was constant. We called it the Million Gig March. And we would rehearse, we'd learn new music, we'd do all these things. So it was very fluid. Our music was always changing. We're always working on things. And, if you're healthy, man, that's the place to be. Great creative place. You can be yourself. Nobody's telling you what to do. You can create anything you want in those chairs at Tower Power, open end. But, if you have health concerns, things happen that, you have to deal with those things. And my body, last year, we were in Europe for the month of July and we were doing Tower Power style. We were doing shows everywhere and overnight trips and all of these other things, back to back this, back to back that. And it just, I could see at that time, I saw how I felt and I realized, wow, this is coming. And I knew it was going to happen at some point. And then when we finished December, I knew that was it for me. I had played my last note. There was no way that I could continue that schedule. We did 183 days last year. That's half the year. And so,
Wow.
that's a lot. It's very, very stressful. So now I'm home. I don't have to be on the tour bus, which is wonderful. I love it. Plus I don't mind. My wife says, "You're home. Get to work. I got things for you to do now." So there's that. I'm doing lots of teaching. I just was in Colorado Springs with Enrique de Almeida, great Berkeley professor at one, retired. He lives in Colorado Springs. He's got this thing called Drum Set Coach Academy, and he had a week-long camp with Mark Walker was there from Arturo Sandoval's band, Bill Gibson from Huey Lewis and the News, who's one of Enrique's students. I know this guy for years. He's with his band. They sold 40 million records, and you should hear him play now. He's studying with Enrique. Man, he's a fantastic, fantastic player. And so, you know, my life now is teaching. I mean, if I get to do some gigs, that's fun. That's cool. But, you know, I'm working on a book, which I really love doing that. I practice in here every day, you know. I got some recording sessions coming, that sort of thing. And that's fine for me. I don't want to wear myself out. You know, my wife tells me, what, do you want to die on the drums? You know, no. So, you know, there's life to be lived, you know, and I'm enjoying myself. I'm healthy. I don't have the stress of, you know, trying to be something that I'm not able to do, you know. So life is good. That's all I have to say, man, you know.
Sounds great. Sounds beautiful.
Very good. Very good.
Let me just ask maybe one more question, and then we're gonna wrap things up for tonight.
Sure.
Okay,
Yes.
so this one is to you, Klaus. Klaus, ideas on Moeller vs push-pull method. So, your thoughts about it or ideas for it? If you could just elaborate on it a little bit.
Well, is it versus or in terms of against or?
I think it's versus. So ideas on Moeller versus push-pull method.
Well, it ultimately has to do with the understanding that the Moeller system, or the system of the old man, as Jim used to say. I'm going to show you the system of the old man. It really does not just contain the wave-like motion of the whip. It also contained what Moeller called the pull-out. And the pull-out is not just a Moeller up-down stroke, as a lot of people would think. So there's a common way of misunderstanding that we would possibly address in the next meeting, July 11, where it's also about some frequent, I don't want to say misconceptions, but let's say misunderstandings about Moeller technique, what it is and what it not is, and all of that. So the Moeller pull-out is actually a thing where you squeeze the stick in your hand, which very much actually comes pretty close to what people refer to as a push-pull technique in the same way. The only difference really is that on Moeller's pull-out, you would squeeze the stick so hard into your hand that you would not be able to continue playing anymore. So that was used for the open roll and for reinforcing the secondary note of an open roll. So push-pull is just a milder form of it, let's say, where you would, do I have a pad here? Where you would, like push-pull would be something like that, in which you're opening and closing, but you continue to go. But the Moeller pull-out really was just that. And it could be to a degree where you'd say, imagine you're playing a flam, but you only have one arm. So let's call it something like that. This you cannot do with push-pull. It's just that. So that was, I mean, there's some common ground to push-pull and the pull-out, which is also a part of the Moeller system, but very few people know about the Moeller pull-out in its pure form, how Chapin was teaching it. So if you want to know more about that, tune in July 11 and we'll discuss more pull-out stuff from here. But other than that, I would not say this versus this. It's all part of the full picture of possibilities that you have when you take a piece of wood in your hands and you just explore the opportunities that you have. It's not this versus that. This is better than this. It's understanding the consequences. When you do this, you get this. When you move the stick like this, you get this. When you hold the stick like that, this is going to be possible, but maybe this not. It's understanding consequences. And this was where Jim took things way further than just communicating what Moeller Technique is and what it is not. He taught you about the consequences of your actions. And he was never like, oh, it should be this and anything else is wrong. That was not Jim's take on it. It was a very open and a very liberal, open-minded view towards technical opportunities and understanding the consequences of your actions, which ultimately leads into finding your own unique voice behind the instrument.
That's awesome. And I think on that note, if you don't mind, I would like to wrap things up, and I would like to say thank you for you, David, for you, Klaus, to being around and sharing all these stories. I'd like to thank every participant for being around and staying until the end. I hope you enjoyed this meeting. And once again, Klaus and David, thank you very much for your time, for all these exciting stories and knowledge and the wisdom. So there's not much else to say. Just thank you and have a great weekend, everyone.